right? I think Tiffany, during our call, you and I had a great pre-call, and you were just mentioning some of the things that you see companies do that would be better if they didn't do. Right? So there are certain missteps companies can make, I think, in terms of approaching the agency. And what are some of the things that you think are really important that they keep in mind to make sure that they have this efficient interaction and that they're asking the most meaningful questions? Some of the biggest challenges or problems that we need to solve together, right, as we're approaching the agency.
Sure. I would say at the IND stage, and this would be for the US FDA, is that there's often a misunderstanding of the amount of information that's required to support initiation of those clinical studies. And for example, with these mRNA cancer therapeutics or vaccines, depending on your jurisdiction, there's a lot of critical information that needs to be provided. And not underestimating what the agency needs to review that, I think is often a big issue. And we can talk more about that as we go through those guidance documents today. But just knowing that the agency is capable of reviewing that material and that it's really important to have it so that they can understand your product, your process, your clinical study.
Absolutely. So is this in terms of your CMC data? Is this what would be specific? What are some of the areas that you think tend to need to be a little bit more bulked up?
Sure. Well, it really depends on the individual product and and the indication. And that's something that, drives people a little bit nuts when they're applying and they're in the cell and gene therapy space, is because the products are so incredibly diverse. The indications are diverse. So there are a lot of complexities there that need to be considered, hence why you want to be engaging, very early. So for example, if you're involving a bioinformatics approach, all of that information needs to be included, and we can talk about that later. Yes. If you're relying on a CMO or a CTO to provide some critical component or some really, important analytical testing, you're going to need to have a great partnership there in order to provide information that your IND that's necessary to your IND, and there can even be phase-specific requirements. So really being in tune with those things early is very, very critical. Some of the materials and reagents you may use for your preclinical studies may not be appropriate for phase 1. They may not be appropriate for people. So being aware of a lot of these different working pieces, it's a really complex puzzle with many pieces that have to fit together in order to initiate those phase 1 studies. And also, you're going to keep figuring out that puzzle as you move through those clinical studies towards licensure.
Yeah, absolutely. I like thinking about it as a puzzle piece, right? Different puzzle pieces. Ulrike, we've talked a little bit about the importance of engaging the regulatory agency early, right? But I'd be curious to hear your take on, what are some of the other best practices you and your team have employed when working with agencies to really kind of ensure your success early on, right? Perhaps for when you're starting an application to enter the clinic.
Yeah, I think, as Tiffany said, it's really depending on the product, right? So, and also on the prior knowledge that you've gained with similar products and or manufacturing processes. So I think you need to have a good look at your current data with regards to the specific product candidate that you want to discuss with the agency, and see what can delineate from earlier experiments with similar products or similar in the case of mRNA, and then also make suggestions on how you would want to build on this data that you've generate yourself, but also with similar products around, and how you put together this justification piece on why you think that this way forward is adequate. On one hand, you do not want to repeat unnecessary studies, unnecessary experiments. You want to be as efficient as possible. You really have to front with and where you really need to develop product-specific data on.
Absolutely. You bring up a really important piece here about prior knowledge, and I know we use the word platform here in the US, right, which is a controversial term to some, but this idea of what we can carry over between our different products, especially, you know, as you're entering the clinic and learning more, what can we carry over with us? So I think that that's a really important piece. Have you found that the agency is open, right, to discussions about prior knowledge so far in the mRNA immunotherapy space where you guys are working?
Maybe I chip in. Yes, indeed. I think with the agencies that we've discussed, there is usually acknowledgement on where we can use prior knowledge. There are of course certain boundaries and edges where things start to blur. And there you might need to figure out where you stand and where the agency stands. Basically, it's the borderline cases or the edges where it starts to get interesting.